Okay, so our discussion for today is take 2 minutes to brainstorm a very short story without writing anything down. Try to think of the concepts, not exactly the words that you will say. It can be a story that happened to you, somebody else, or total fiction. So you people at home, think about the story for about 2 minutes and then take the time to write it down. So that would be your storytelling process. And think of any questions that somebody might ask you about the story and what your response might be, just off the top of your head. Okay, so today we are discussing, we're continuing our discussion on language. So we're just going to finish that up today, and then I'm going to open up the room for any questions that you have about the paper or anything like continuing class this semester. So really anything. We all came up with short stories. What did we think about the exercise of telling the story to other people? Like, was that easy for you? How quickly did you come up with answers?
I thought it was kind of hard to initially come up with the story or think of it, but once I thought of it, it kind of got me thinking, oh, and I remember this time too, and then this time, and I could think of more stories, I guess, after I thought of the first one.
Nice. So it came into your mind, and then the language, all the words started to follow, and you had that sort of narrative process. Yeah, sounds good. Something like that. Okay, so this is really talking about, we're going to just finish up that lecture on language and talking about how do you use language to convey a story to somebody, how quickly we can think of words that from our over 50,000 words that we remember, they pop into our head really easily and we can communicate to each other. So just think about that. I'm going to go to the syllabus really quick and just go over what we have coming up. So I skipped visual imagery, and you might have noticed that from the syllabus. So we're going to start visual imagery on Thursday. So we're finishing up language today and then just having questions. So then we will talk about visual imagery starting Thursday. Next Tuesday, we don't have class. I will be at a conference in New York at the time. So take the time to finish up your article review or, sleep in, do whatever you want at that point. Maybe try to relax. That's my takeaway for this semester, this point in the semester. Mm-hmm. Yes, paper is due 7th. I should update this too. Okay, so paper for normal everything is due on the 7th. People who I didn't get back to right away, and it took me a while. And side note, if I haven't gotten back to you, if you're waiting for some response, something went horribly wrong, come talk to me. We'll figure it out. I'll give you your paper approval, and you'll probably get even a later date. So just make sure that at this point, I think everything is sorted out. In my mind, everything is sorted out. Tell me if things aren't sorted out for you. So you should know if you're submitting on the 7th or on the 14th. Remember that this shouldn't be, so I'll open up for questions anybody has. I know the guidelines are pretty loose. Really, in my mind, this is a personal exercise. You are reading these articles, and I've seen all of your articles, and they seem really interesting. So hopefully you picked a topic that was really interesting to you and are reading and interacting with the information in maybe a novel way for you. I know reading research papers is kind of different than other things. So really what you're going to do in your paper is tell me about the article that you read, your thoughts about the article, sort of this personal reflection, your interpretation of things. It's really loose. I'm not looking for you to check boxes and do a great job on a checklist necessarily. I want you to just write from yourself, write from your own personal perspective, what you thought about this paper. So I don't want it to come off as dry. I just want you to think, you can add silliness, that silliness is appreciated. It's hard to read through 95 5 to 10 page papers. It's on my plate, just letting you know. So be entertaining, have a good time. I'm not a super strict grader, but that said, make sure that you're that I can actually read this. So if you're somebody who has a lot of problems with grammar or spelling or whatever, I'll give you the benefit of the doubt as long as I can read it, but if I have to struggle through 5 to 10 pages, that might be kind of difficult, so you will have some sort of grade implication for that. So just make sure that you can convey whatever message you're trying to convey. At this point, we're all adults. This is a good exercise. If this is something that you personally struggle with, you can either send me a draft early and we can talk about it. So send me a draft by the original due date is the 31st. That might be a little early. Send me a draft. If you can send me a draft by this weekend, so that would be the 2nd and 3rd. I don't know who plans on doing this really, but if you can send me a draft by this weekend, I can kind of get back to you. Again, though, it's not super strict. I'm not going to be a super strict grader, so just kind of write from yourself. And I don't want you to be concerned so much. I just want you to read a paper and know what you're talking about when you have read a paper. Does that make sense? Does anybody have questions specifically on that? Mm-hmm.
And you said it doesn't have to be in the APA format.
No, I mean, you yourself, you're just reading like their method section, their intro section, all those types of things. So you would write like what the paper is about, you know, what is involved in their procedures, their methods, their results, like what is there, but you don't have to follow a strict format. Just communicate it to me, really. Yep, how are we feeling about that? I know it might sound kind of scary, this 5 to 10 page thing, but I really think as soon as you get started, it'll flow if you haven't already gotten started. Remember, it's double spaced, so, and less is more. So maybe stick more to that 5 page than 10 page. However long you need to fully explain something, you take that time. You take whatever space you need, but don't feel like you need to cram things in to get extra like effort points, basically. I had a question over here.
No, I thought it was 6 to 10 pages.
No, 5 to 10. Even better, right? Okay. Yeah. So we're just going to, we're going to finish up language, and then we're going to start visual imagery on Thursday. One more thing. Somebody asked me to post a place to submit your paper online, so I just did that. You can go to Blackboard, go under assignments, and then there will be a post. You should be able to upload a document into that post, or into that thing. So it should be pretty self-explanatory. Click on the assignment link, click on the paper review, upload a draft. I mean, I don't know what you guys see on your screen, and I think Blackboard is terrible. So let me know if you have problems doing that, but it should be okay for you guys to do. I know it's possible. Mm-hmm. No, I don't need a physical copy. I will probably write notes. I'll try to write notes to all of you, and just, you know, also my chance to let you know if you need guidance on any kind of understanding of things. So I'll try to write edits and notes to everybody, and that'll be just in the document online. Save a tree, right? Okay. Okay. So I think we talked a little bit, so we're just finishing this up. When we're talking about our understanding of sentences, there are two different approaches to the way that a human mind will understand a sentence as it goes along. So take, for example, and we talked about this a little bit last time, put the apple on the towel in the box. So there are two different ways for this sentence to be interpreted. So it could be either put the apple that is now on the towel, take it off of the towel and put it into the box, or it could be take an apple anywhere in the environment and put it on top of the towel that is already within the box. And to study this, there were two different conditions. So there was a condition in which there are two apples presented to you. So this study was performed with an eye tracker. So participants first fixated on the fixation cross, and then when they were read, put the apple. So as soon as they heard that, their eyes moved off of the fixation cross onto the apple. So the apple that was on the napkin in one condition, or just the apple that was on the napkin. So this is the one that we're most interested in. So anybody that looked to that apple first, now we can look at, once you say on the towel, eyes move from that apple. You say, whoops, I made a mistake. Not this apple, but the apple that's on the towel. So move eyes there. And then in the box, as soon as you look at the apple that is on the towel, then your eyes move to the box. That's the goal direction. First, a condition where there's only one apple. So you hear the word, or the participant hears the word, put the apple. So eyes move off of fixation to the apple. On the towel, so it moves to another towel, because it's basically the apple on the towel. Maybe you need to do that. Move the apple to the towel, to the other towel, basically. So eyes move from fixation to apple to towel. And then I hear in the box, and the participant goes, oh, I made a mistake moving this apple. Let me backtrack, move my eyes back to the apple that's on the towel, move my eyes to the box. That would be the goal direction. So what you can really tell about this is it's the idea of your interpretation of what the sentence means along with the meaning of the actual sentence. So I know that it's syntactically correct, and I've worked my way along that path. The sentence itself makes sense, but I've separated those phrases out, and it means certain things to me. My eyes are moving from one thing that makes sense, so one goal, to another one. So basically that we've separated those phrases out and interpreted some meaning at that point. That's the conclusion of this experiment. So rather than just thinking of syntax and then putting our interpretation on top of that, we're doing these things at the same time. So it's interacting. Yeah, so which one is correct? There is evidence for both of these approaches. Kind of talked about last week, and then this was the interactionist approach. So it is an ongoing debate. There's evidence for both sides. You'll find a lot of this in cognitive science and other things, because we have to remember that whole black box thing. People have their theory about what's going on, and they will defend that to the death a lot of times, which isn't necessarily a positive thing for science, but basically there are different phenomena, different things that could explain our understanding of concepts so far. You might even be a person to come up with a totally new theory that does a better job of explaining these things. So it's basically, we can't know what is correct in a lot of these ways. There might not ever be a consensus on certain things, but we do our best and have these theories, and then there are even still camps of people who align behind one and align behind the other one. So it's kind of interesting. And you never know who you're going to piss off if you say a certain thing in a certain crowd. So it's just interesting science stuff. So there's evidence that the semantics are taken into account early, that interactionist approach, and that word meaning is needed to determine the entire sentence meaning. That's just what I want you to take away from that. Okay, so understanding text and stories relates to sort of what we discussed in the beginning when you created your stories. So we know that communicating information is not immediate. I can't just have a thought and then telepathically communicate it to you. It takes my actual verbiage and thinking about something and telling you in a way that I think will spark those certain ideas and increase learning, as is the course of this session, this course, education generally. I have to talk to you, you have to try to pay attention, and hopefully we get something meaningful out of this. But this is strung together by a series of sentences that hopefully connect meaningfully to each other. But basically you need to string a lot of different concepts together to be able to fully communicate your entire message. So understanding a story, there has to be some form of coherence, and coherence is representation of the text in a person's mind so that information in one part of the text is related to information in another part of the text. You'll see example in a second. And texts with coherence are easier to understand than text without coherence. So how inference creates coherence, we have to make inferences about information that comes before to information that comes after. So most coherence, understanding that full concept, is helped along by the fact that we are able to make these inferences. So an inference is a process by which readers can create information during reading that is not explicitly stated in the text. So you'll see an example in just a second. And there are different types of inferences. There's the anaphoric, instrumental, and causal. So anaphoric inference is basically an inference that connects an object in one sentence to an object in another sentence. So you can communicate this with pronouns. So she in this sentence, so I'll read it first. Rafifi, the famous poodle, won the dog show. She has won the last 3 shows she has entered. In the second sentence, we don't have any understanding if the second sentence was isolated, we don't know who she refers to. But we know that the first sentence is talking about Rafifi, so that comes before the second one, and we make the inference that she is referring to Rafifi. So here's another example, so in a slightly longer text. What we really love to do on our vacation time is go down to our ranch in Marshall, Texas. We have close to 500 acres. There are lots of ponds, and I take the kids out and we fish, and then, of course, we grill them. So we make the inference that we grill them does not refer to the children. The children aren't grilled, it is the fish that are grilled. So you don't know that from necessarily the written verbiage of the sentences. In fact, grammatically, you would make the inference that grill them would refer to the children. Very cruel practice, I don't recommend it. So we know in this case, just making our logical assumption that them refers to fish instead of children. So here's another inference that you can make. So it's an inference about the tools and the methods that are used in a sentence. So in this sentence, we know that, William Shakespeare wrote Hamlet while he was sitting at his desk. So we know that the person who is sitting at the desk is probably not Hamlet. We know that it's Shakespeare. A lot of that you're going to know just because you know that Hamlet is the play. And he who wrote the play, Shakespeare, was writing it while he was sitting at a desk. So you know there's some relationship between writing and desk, and you know that Hamlet is the play. So it makes sense then to you, even though it might be sort of a vague sentence, to relate he and his to Shakespeare and not Hamlet. And then a causal inference, so something about the relationship between cause and effect in a sentence. So this is an inference, rightly or wrongly, that results from the conclusion that events described in one sentence were caused by events described in a previous sentence. So you know that when you're stringing things together, there's some form of relationship. So typically the things that come first in a paragraph or in a string of sentences happened before the things that came afterwards. So the example would be Sharon took an aspirin, her headache went away, versus Sharon took a shower, her headache went away. If I present the first line to you, the inference you would likely make is that the aspirin was the factor that got rid of the headache, whereas if I just presented to you the second sentence, you would likely say the shower is the thing that caused her headache to go away. There's not anything written in the sentence. We don't have, it's not stated that the aspirin did make the headache go away. Just because it came first in those two sentences, that's the inference that you're likely to make. So using these rules, basically understand how a person is likely to interpret what you have written. We don't always necessarily follow these rules, and we might cause people to misinterpret what we are saying. But this is sort of the cognitive psych approach to writing stories that are clear and understandable. So there's also, so this is the situation model of understanding text. So your mental representation of what the text is about. There's an experiment I'll show you in a second. So the model of the situation as you're being presented with this language, it does not inform about the phrases or the sentences or the paragraphs, but instead it represents the situation in terms of people, objects, and events. So it's sort of your picture in your mind of what's going on. And the events described in the story are experienced to you. I'll show you again in one moment. And the experience is from the viewpoint of the protagonist, typically. So a protagonist in a story is you could think of the hero or the person that the story is being told from the perspective of, that main character. So if I'm telling you a story about somebody, they are themselves the protagonist, the subject of that story. And we're going to be people-centered. It's typically people. Okay, so then information that is hard to access for the protagonist is also hard to access for the reader. It's kind of an interesting concept, but hopefully this will clear it up. So here's an interesting experiment about this mental representation of this text and your understanding of the text. So a participant would read the following lines. Melanie ran downstairs and threw herself onto the couch. An exciting horror movie was on the television. She opened a bag of chips and dug right in. She watched a vampire stalk the helpless victim. She had never seen the movie before. And then in one condition, the participants then see Melanie's mother appeared in front of the television. She told Melanie not to forget about her homework. And then in the other condition, Melanie's mother appeared behind the television. She told Melanie not to forget about her homework. So in your mind, you can see one of these two things, or you're likely to construct this as your representation just based on the elements that I've described to you and where they are presented. So in condition A, this blocked condition where her mother came downstairs and is standing in front of the television. So her view of the television is obscured. In the other condition, her mother's standing behind the television. So she still has visual access to the television. And based off of this, we are experiencing life through the eyes of Melanie. And this experiment gives you a little bit of justification for that concept. Basically, if you're taking reaction times to questions about the scene, people were asked then, was the victim being stalked by a vampire? Speaking about the television and what's being presented on the television. This was literally something that was presented to the participants, but in the condition where the television was blocked, it took longer for them to access this thought. Basically, the interpretation of these results is that in your mind, it's harder to remember what was going on in the television because we're now thinking about the mother, and our view of the television in our mental representation is blocked. And then, okay, so we're going to talk about producing language. I think we're almost done. I know I've got some tired-looking faces. Understandable. Okay, so how do speakers create meaning for listeners? So the synthesis of a story is something that comes relatively easy to us, as we kind of saw by telling each other our stories in the beginning of this session. Maybe with a little bit of prodding, you need to start remembering what you're going to tell people. But basically, it's very capable, or it's a capacity for humans, and it's not a capacity for animals, for instance, or computers, for instance. It's something that we are relatively very good at. So why? Why is this happening? How are we doing this? So when you're producing language, the words that you are going to speak to a person need to be retrieved from your memory. And this happens very rapidly. So think about more than 3 words are being presented from my mouth to you per second from my memory, from what I studied to present to you. So this is this is done very quickly. And remember that it's being drawn from a pool of about 50,000 words. So how are words retrieved so rapidly and then combined into a grammatically correct presentation of a sentence? So the way that you can really study this, or we can gain some insights by studying errors, the way that people typically make errors when they are speaking to one another. So the frequency of different types of errors gives you a little bit of an understanding of how the brain is synthesizing these things. So our most common errors are going to indicate some of these basic units within our minds of how language is processed. So I'll give you examples in a second. And then patterns of errors. If you're talking about the frequency that errors are occurring, you can then generate, or you can then start to talk about the patterns and what's really occurring, and it'll make more sense in a second when we start talking about it. So speech errors do not occur randomly. There are things that that can be observed. There are patterns that can be observed, and that will give us some insight into how the brain does this, basically. So this is an example of a phoneme exchange. So remember, a phoneme is that little tiny unit, that most basic unit of whatever concept, whatever word, that if you mix it up, it becomes a different word. It totally changes the meaning. So people often make this type of mistake, or it's a very common dad joke, something like fleeky skewer versus squeaky floor. So this is basically just a flipping of the first 2, so the FL and the SQ. So flipping these around. Who knows? What's a good dad joke? Who's got one of these, right? Do you guys know what I'm talking about? Mm-hmm.
I'm hungry. Hi, hungry. I'm
Yeah, that's a good one. I can't think of any off the top of my head, but my dad often did this type of thing. You just exchange the first 2 things, and it's kind of like a rhyming scheme. If you think about it, just yell it out as we continue. Keep your minds open. So this tells us a little bit about a common type of mistake. So consonant vowel rules. These phonemes of the same type will replace another. So you could replace a vowel with another vowel, or you can replace consonants with other consonants. So yeah, basically in the top we have FL, both consonants, SQ, both consonants. So those are sort of the flip that occurs. You're less likely to flip things that are consonants and vowels, so not the same type of phoneme. So it's kind of interesting that our minds distinguish so much between these vowels and these consonants. Mm-hmm.
Would it be the same if you cause sometimes I'll be saying something and I'll just tie 2 words together and I'll be like, what did I just say? But it was like my brain just combined 2 words that normally wouldn't have been combined.
It definitely, yeah. So that's definitely an interesting phenomena. Yeah, it could be that you're doing this type of thing where things are switching around in your mind, and yeah, it's that sort of process. So yeah, the phoneme, remember, is the tiny basic thing that makes up the words. So if that's what is getting messed with in your language process, that tells you a little bit about, or that's justification for what or how your mind represents these phonemes. again, so just highlighting the difference between the vowels and the consonants. Your mind will distinguish between these two. It shows you a little bit more about what's meaningful in our mind, in language. There's also word exchanges. I'm sure you probably have had this phenomena happen to you as well. So somebody says, I have to fill up my gas with car instead of I have to fill up my car with gas. Or once I stop, I can't start. Once I start, I can't stop. So these are typical exchanges that might happen accidentally within a sentence. So this is another common mistake, and what the pattern that you find with it is that typically nouns will replace nouns, so get flipped in your mind, and verbs will replace verbs, where it's not as common for a noun to replace a verb or a verb to replace a noun. So again, a little bit more justification for why grammatically we make these distinctions between certain things. So it's not necessarily an artificial boundary so much as it is the way our minds represent this information. Who was a sassy kid and hated grammar classes and grammar lessons? Nobody was sassy? Nobody? Oh, you guys are so good. You're good kids. Better than me.
Mutually exclusive thing.
What's that?
You can be sassy, but still not have a problem.
But you weren't grammar sassy. So that's, I guess that's something, right?
Like grammar sassy, like correcting people, or just hated doing like grammar assignments?
Both. Those are good examples of being grammar sassy. So you could either say, this is stupid, why am I learning this? I know how to talk, whatever. I was probably in that camp when I was a kid. But basically, don't be grammar sassy. It's important. It's useful for communicating to other people. We should appreciate linguists and all of the things that they do for us and all of the way that our minds represent language. Also, don't be a grammar Nazi, because nobody likes a grammar Nazi, right? Anyway.
Usually I'm like correct people's grammar when we're in like an argument and they're like texting. I'm like, you can't even spell that right, or you can't even punctuate.
And that just makes people mad, right? Just really pokes at
I
them.
don't even understand what you're saying because that doesn't make sense.
Yeah, I'll correct people who like I don't like. I'm just like, that's not how you say that.
That's a good, that's an interesting emergent behavior too, right? To piss somebody off, right? That is interesting. So maybe that's something you learn as you grow up as well. Like, only be a grammar Nazi when you're mad at somebody, because nobody likes to hear that. Like, it typically does make people mad, right? If you're bringing that type of thing up. So know when to use it. Know when to make somebody mad.
Some people do it to have fun.
Yeah. It's trolling, right?
And they're like used to it too, like every time we make a mistake they call it out.
Mm-hmm. So then you want to call it out for them too, right?
Yeah, but they're really good at it.
I used to like call it out by accident and like not like just because sometimes I'll say it in my head, but instead of keeping it in my head, I'll say it out loud, and I just kind of like feel like an asshole. I'm like, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to like correct you like that. Everyone
Yeah, but you shouldn't feel too bad if it's something that totally
controlled
pops
it,
in your
like,
mind.
as I've gotten older.
Right, but
It's one of those things that's like it's in my head to like fix it, but I ended up saying it out loud by accident.
yeah, well, you're a language master, if that's sort of what comes to your mind. I mean, we're all to some extent, but you know, it's something that's really easy to access. But yeah, so it's maybe a type of learning. Only piss somebody off with grammar when you're using it to your advantage. Anyway, so the difference between this and the next slide, so if you're saying a sentence and you flip things around verse, you can just totally substitute different words, not necessarily what you are intending on doing, but something else, maybe a similar word pops into your mind. But again, typically nouns are going to replace nouns and verbs are going to replace verbs. So in communicating a whole conversation, there are things that we need to keep in our minds. There are things that we need to have an easy memory of and keep in our working memory easily. So we have to coordinate a lot of complex information to carry on a conversation with somebody. And this happens fairly easily for a native speaker, which is interesting. So people need to take what the other person is saying into account. We need to predict what others are going to say, and conversations are coordinated semantically and syntactically. So here's some evidence. So the meaning of the words are the semantic coordination. As a conversation goes on, we're going to remember details, and new sentences, new information is only going to serve to further flesh out our understanding of what's going on. So if I was to present to you, Ed was given an alligator for his birthday. Possibly you already knew that Ed had a birthday, so that's something that you already knew, and then I'm telling you he was given an alligator for his birthday. So you remember that Ed was having a birthday, and this is new information that just further enlightens your understanding of this. He got an alligator. So now you know the party and you know the alligator. As I continue, I can say now the alligator was his favorite present. So now we keep stringing along our different understandings of that situation. So given from what we previously knew, he got an alligator as a birthday present, really weird birthday present. But the new information that you're presented with just further fleshes it out again. We know that the alligator was his favorite present. So given new contract, so a strategy to guide people through a conversation. So construction should include the given and the new information. Basically, you want to keep your listener informed of what's going on. So creating that connection between what happened previously and what continues to occur. So you can see in both of these, I guess, sentence examples that they connect to the previously understood information in that you already knew he was having a birthday party, and then now we know that he got an alligator for his birthday, so that's relating to that party, but adding on. And again, the alligator was his favorite present that he got from his birthday party, or for his birthday. There's also syntactic priming. So it's basically the way that information is presented to you will stick in your mind in that specific way. So remember, priming is when you're presented with previous information and that influences how you perform later, just based off of what was given to you. So in this experiment, people heard a sentence of a particular syntactic construction, so the same information is being presented, but it's being presented in this specific way. Either the girl gave the book to the boy, or the girl gave the boy the book. So same information is being presented in both of these, just the syntax is different. So participants were sitting in front of a list of cards or a presentation of like a matching game. I'll just go to the slide. So there was a Confederate, so there was somebody who was part of the experimenter group and helping present information to the participant. So first they would read through the list of cards, and then they would read these sentences. So for instance, the girl gave the boy the book. So that's one condition of the syntax. So then participants would see that matching card picture, and then later when they were, so in the second part of the experiment, later they would go through each of the cards that they'd already heard a description for, and they would recite back that information or what the picture depicted in that card. And what they found is basically people who were presented with one type of syntax would recite that same thing back. So it's basically that when hearing something in a certain way, that's also how your mind is going to keep in that information. So it's not just the meaning, but it is the syntax as well that's communicated to you. And then just in summary, so language is a system of communication that uses sounds and symbols to express feelings, thoughts, ideas, and experiences. All words a person knows, all the words a person will know is called their lexicon. So it's all the words and it's typically 50,000 words, that type of thing. A phoneme and a morpheme are two basic units of words. So a phoneme is that either vowel, consonants, whatever that little sound is, that if you replace that, it changes the whole meaning of the word. The word itself is the morpheme. So there's a difference between truck and trucks, even though they're the same type of thing. They're different categories in your mind. One is singular, one is plural. So they're two different morphemes. The effect of meaning on perception and phonemes is called a phoneme restoration effect. So remember, if I'm presenting something to you and then I cough, when I'm presenting a certain word, your mind will fill in the blank and you will perceive that phoneme even if you didn't actually hear it from me. Your ability to understand words is influenced by the word frequency and the context. So your reaction time is different when you're hearing a word that you're not typically presented with versus a word that is typically presented to you in your daily life. A lexical ambiguity refers to the fact that a word can have multiple meanings. So the difference between my mom is bugging me and my mom is bugging me, one is bothering, one is placing secret recording devices in my room. Very different thing, but you're going to pick up on that based off of the context of how I'm presenting that information to you. So lexical priming experiments show that the meaning of a word is activated immediately after the word is presented. Meaning of sentences is determined by semantics and syntax. And parsing, which is that different cutting up of the sentence or what's presented to you into meaningful phrases, is grouped in, so they're cut up and they're grouped into phrases that we might understand in this syntax first approach, so cutting it up into grammatically correct phrases first and then interpreting meaning, or possibly we're doing this at the same time, so processing a phrase and what it means at the same time. Coherence enables us to understand stories and is largely determined by our inferences of what happened before connecting to the new information that's presented to you. The situation model approach states that people represent the situation in a story in terms of people, objects, locations, and events that are being described within the story. So you have this mental representation of the things that are presented in the story, and that will affect your understanding or how you can then remember or recall information. One major tool to study production or speech production is the errors that we will commonly make, what those errors tell us about how language is represented in our minds. And semantic and syntactic coordination are necessary in our conversations. Yep, we went through, so that's it for today. Yeah, ask me questions. Mm-hmm.
Is this just dealing with spoken language, like not writing or comprehending that way?
No, it's all language. It's written as well as spoken.
Well, because I'm wondering if you've ever heard of the thing where, like, if you keep the first letter and the last letter the same in a sentence, but, like, jumble the ones in between, you can still read the sentence?
Yeah, you can do that with like all kinds of different words within a sentence, and your mind will just go through and interpret the correct way, right?
Yeah, so that's just, that sort of has to do with this, I guess.
Yeah, it definitely does. So it's basically when you have something that's ambiguous or something that you wouldn't normally be presented with, your mind can make sense based off of the context that it's being presented to you. I've seen the same thing if you totally remove the letter E from a paragraph. You can have the paragraph and then all of the letters just no E throughout the entire paragraph. Your mind might be better at filling in the blank for E because E is a very common vowel. It's the most common vowel. I think it's maybe even the most common letter. So yeah, definitely that there are common ways that our minds interpret language, and you can study that, and it can be very interesting. So yeah, I would definitely recommend people study language. I don't particularly study it, so I might not be the best to ask about things, but if you do have questions, I can get back to you even. I know this has been sort of dry. It's been pretty dry lately. Yeah, I got a head nod in the back. Yep, it has been dry. I admit it. So what sort of things, what's interesting to you so far about what we've been learning? What do you wish you knew more about? We wish we knew more about our beds, right? Understandable. Well, at least it's becoming spring. Things are getting brighter. Sun's coming up earlier. 6 more weeks of school?
Yeah, I just counted.
Nice. We're ready for summer, right? No?
I'm ready. I'm tired.
Skip all of April? Yeah, I could do that. Sounds good to me.
To get through because it's like it's right before finals because I don't know, February is short, so then you have March, but we have spring break in March,
Mhm.
and you have April. It kind
Yeah.
of sucks.
I'm ready for another spring break. Are you guys? Yeah, right? 2 weeks spring break? Yeah. Yeah, I'm with you. Yeah, but you know, we're in this together. Let's try to get through everything that's going on. We're still learning about cognition. We're learning about all of our other courses. So yeah, I will try to spice things up in the future. I'll do my best. It's interesting stuff. It just can get a little bit dry, I think, when you're analyzing little individual things. But hopefully you are inspired to learn. That's it, really.
It's not like not everything is boring. It's like not bad.
What's that?
It's not bad. It's more interesting than I thought this class was gonna be.
Well, that's good.
Required, and I was like, and I just came from abnormal psych, so I was like, probably that doesn't sound as interesting.
Yeah, abnormal's kind of that flashy, fun thing, right? Whereas this is sort of like, if you think about it like a required course, and it is a required course, and it's useful stuff, that might make it a little harder to appreciate, though. So,
It's not
but we like it, right? We're having a good time. That's